Hi everyone, this is Amric from Dubility. We'll be starting in just a moment. I'm still going to just delay 1 or 2 minutes if that's okay, just to give everybody a chance to arrive. We had a lot of interest in this webinar. Also, just excuse me a moment. I'm going to stop my screen share just for a few seconds. I'll resume in a moment. In the meantime, am I audible? Can everybody who's connected so far hear me? Just a yes and the chat would help. Great. All right, that's enough, thanks. Okay. So I think we can get started. It's 2 minutes past. I'm sure some other folks will be joining us just now. Bear with me a moment. All right, to start us off with, I'm just going to paste a welcome message to you all, as well as some links, which I need to share with you. These links will be shared with you again later on in a follow-up email. But I just wanted to share these resources in advance as well. So anyway, getting started. Hi, everyone. My name is Amric. I am our Director of Customer Success at Dubility. We are the makers of the SurveyCTO data collection platform. And I'm here today to talk to you about decentralized deployment of data collection projects. So I mentioned already that I've pasted a message in the chat. There are a number of resources in the text that I've pasted in. Right at the top of that pasted in text is a link to a feedback form. We'd love to know what you thought of your webinar experience with us. So please do follow the link and provide feedback later. Otherwise, the webinar is being recorded and the recording will be made available soon in our video library. So you'll be able to share that or review it as you like. I'll also be keeping an eye out for questions posted in the chat and the Q&A, which we will address at the end of the webinar. So great, let's get started. Just before we go over the agenda, I wanted to speak briefly about the Safe People and Data Initiative. The Safe People and Data Initiative is something new that the team at Dubility have spearheaded, which we hope to grow through your participation and support. Some months now into the COVID-19 pandemic, I'm sure it is now clear to most people that a business as usual approach to continued data collection for research, monitoring, and evaluation just isn't possible. With this in mind, we want to help advance safety-focused practice in the sector that we serve. This means going beyond technology, which is still important, into discussions about new practice, mixed approaches to data collection to help deepen our collective understanding of how to operate now. Our hope is that through experience, creative problem solving, and sharing, we can learn to continue generating the primary data evidence base that we rely on, not only in a safe way, but also in a more efficient way than we did before. So the world has already changed around us, and we feel that this initiative can provide an opportunity to connect, learn from one another, and reach a new level in the work that we do. We would love to hear from you about how you're adapting, changing your approach to work in general. If those changes or revisions that you're making to your processes fall inside the scope of the Safe People and Data Initiative, and if you're keen to share, please do get in touch with us. You can take a look at the homepage with the link down or the URL down in the bottom right. And there's also a contact email. So take a look. We will be in touch as well, sharing more about this in an email follow-up to this webinar. So, okay, thanks for your attention about that. On to today's overview and topic. So, this is what we'll be covering today. We'll look at what we think decentralized deployment means, how to recruit remotely, how to onboard teams remotely, which will be our focus, how to train remotely, and how supervisors can help remotely accompany interviews. So again, I've already shared resources on all of these topics in the chat window, and we'll follow up with links to all of these resources. So firstly, decentralized deployment. What does decentralized deployment mean? So the broader concept is that of getting your research team, devices, software, all prepared, ready to conduct interviews and collect data, all remotely. In most parts of the world, there's still an imperative to avoid making physical contact. I'm seeing a message from Zach in the chat who says he's unable to see the presentation. Is everyone else able to see the presentation? Okay, apologies. I'm very sorry about that. Thank you for pointing that out. So just to backtrack, if you don't mind, I will not go over that first slide about the Safe People and Data Initiative, but I'll just show you the slide quickly. So this is the initiative that I described initially. Sorry that I was not aware that the screen share wasn't working at that time. So if you do want to find out more about the Safe People and Data Initiative, this is the website to visit, and from there you can decide about whether it's something that you would like to participate in or find out more about. So otherwise, just to give you a look at the agenda, I mean, I talked you through this, but we'll discuss everything from what is centralized deployment all the way down on the slide to a remote accompaniment of interviews. Okay, so sorry about that. All right, so back to the first topic, decentralized deployment. I'll start fresh here. Okay, so again, what does decentralized deployment mean? The broader concept that we want to get across is that of getting your research teams, devices, and software all ready and prepared to conduct interviews and collect data, all remotely. In most parts of the world, there's still an imperative to avoid making physical contact, and that has a few ingredients. So when you don't have a team assembled already, you'll need to recruit one, ideally remotely, conducting employment interviews over the phone or video calls. There's also training of your team, which should happen remotely, seeing as it will not be possible to connect the team in person. And this is internet dependent, and there are a few strategies which you can deploy depending on how good or bad the internet connection your team will be having. Unless truly unavoidable, you'll also want your team to use the equipment and devices that they have on hand for safety's sake. So if you're running computer-assisted telephone interviews, there are different configurations, for example, of devices that are workable. One device might be used for both calls and data capture, or two devices might be used, one for calls and another for data input. So there are different options in this respect. This is something that we have discussed in other webinars, but also we've gone into detail in our CATI guide. And lastly, for the content in this webinar, we're also going to be looking at how to get your team set up with the software that you'll be using, so that it'll be set up uniformly, and you'll provide a facility for getting set up that's really easy for beginners on the team, but it will also help experienced team members get set up consistently. All right. So let's discuss remote recruitment just briefly. So this isn't the focus of our webinar. Something that hasn't changed at all is that a successful survey depends on the people who will be conducting interviews and making observations. So the quality of the team, including how well prepared they are, is very important. So who you hire to work on your project is actually quite a big decision. You could hire a survey research firm to solve all these problems for you. But we are aware that many SurveyCTO users prefer to manage their own fieldwork, staying connected with everything that's happening in the field. If you happen to have done a survey before in a particular part of the world, you might already have contacts of good enumerators that you could hire to work on your new study, which is always a great option. You could advertise online, but you might have reasonable doubts as to whether online adverts are the best way to find experienced enumerators for your project, depending on the country. Staffing agencies and labor brokers are also something to consider, but unless they have some sort of focus on research, they may not have experienced enumerators in your project, available for your projects. So otherwise, these challenges are probably quite familiar, I'm guessing, because recruitment generally happens at a distance. It's not as if you stick up adverts yourself to recruit enumerators off the street, but I would love to discuss this in a little bit of detail in the Q&A. So if you have been recruiting people remotely, please let us know later how you are approaching that. Just briefly, I'm seeing in the chat, one of our attendees, Prince, is struggling to hear or view. I think this might be a problem that Prince is having. Is anybody else having a problem seeing the presentation or hearing me? Or are we all good still? Okay, so no issue with at least 2 of us. Okay, 3, 4, 5. Okay, that's enough. I think we're all good on the technical side. So apologies, Prince. I think you're experiencing local technical difficulty. See what you can do, but you'll always be able to view the recording later. Thanks everybody who chimed in there. Okay, so that's remote recruitment. That's an important part of the picture. Right, so now on to decentralized deployment with SurveyCTO. This will likely be the most interesting and newest part of our presentation. All right, so anyone who has set up SurveyCTO Collect on a device knows that there are a number of steps that are required. These steps are not difficult, but they are necessary in order to get up and running so you can start filling out forms. I'm wondering, has anybody in attendance ever had to talk somebody through setting up SurveyCTO Collect over the phone, giving instructions to an enumerator how to set up their own device? Is that something that you've done? Okay, well, I have one yes. I was just hoping for one yes, so that's great. Anyway, if you have had this experience, that you know that talking somebody through that challenge can be difficult, but there is a much better way of approaching that today. And I'm going to talk you through that. So we've just recently made 2 brand new features available to make remotely setting up SurveyCTO Collect on Android much easier and faster, and generally more consistent. However, the primary purpose of these features is that they allow you to set up SurveyCTO Collect remotely. The first new feature is what we call Quick Setup. The Quick Setup process allows you to generate a link that will guide the user through installing and configuring SurveyCTO Collect. The second is a related feature called Default Device Configurations. Default device configurations store SurveyCTO settings and instructions on how to automatically download forms and any related cases data set. This also allows you to save time, making the setup process easy for enumerators and allowing you to operate in a decentralized way. This also allows you to simplify training because you can rely upon a polished default device configuration rather than training your enumerators to set up the device thoroughly themselves. These features are supported for the time being only on the early release version of SurveyCTO Collect, not the official version via the Play Store. However, until these new features are merged into the official release, the quick setup process will direct users to install the early release. So the process is actually made a little easier in that respect. Okay, so that's the background for the quick setup. I'm now going to walk you through the process. So if you want to review the slides later, which will be shared, and the video, you'll be able to step through and do the same. Okay. So if you want to help your team to get set up with SurveyCTO Collect remotely, your work starts on the Collect tab of the server console. You might have already seen this new mobile data collection section. There are 2 new actions you can take on the mobile data collection section. You can share a quick setup link with SurveyCTO Collect users or enumerators who are not yet Collect users. And you can also create default device configurations at the bottom. Even though default device configurations come second, we suggest that you create one of these first. So you would click on this button to create default device configuration. So in this version of things, that's how we'll start. Okay, so this button at the bottom gets clicked. Okay, so then this next set of options appears. If I clicked on the Create Default Device Configuration button, this is what you'll see. First, you will pick a user role. Default device configurations are uniquely associated with user roles. If you've mostly used SurveyCTO on a single team server, you would not strictly have needed to learn much about user roles. Regardless, I suggest that you do some reading about user roles. Amongst the links I've shared, there is the documentation on user roles. In the screenshots, you'll see the basic global user roles that you're probably familiar with. Depending on your needs, the global data collection only user role with a single device default configuration could be enough. However, I just want to make it clear that you can create as many custom user roles that you would like. And each custom user role, and it could be a data collection only user role, exactly like the global role, could have its own default device configuration. You could do this once per project so that each project has its own unique configuration, but maybe as an organization, you decide on one configuration that works for all projects. Both are possible. Again, so going back to the top level of what we're doing, you pick the user role and you click the next button in the bottom right of the screen. That reveals another screen, and you have a few more options to configure. So after clicking on next, you'll want to configure some of these options. You don't need to do all of these. These are all optional, but it does make sense to consider each. So first, we recommend that you add a SurveyCTO Collect settings option. So here you would click on the button to receive settings from Collect. And from SurveyCTO Collect, you would enter the admin settings, and inside admin settings, there's a contextual menu button for sending settings from Collect to the server. I'll show you what this looks like on the next slide. But the idea is you configure the device once, exactly how you like it, and then everybody gets the same settings. You can also choose to have the cases dataset associated with that user role sent out with the default device configuration. Each user role has the option of setting up an association with the cases dataset, so that's useful if you use case management. Forms can also be included with a default device configuration, which is great. Because that allows you to make sure that enumerators already have the forms that they need. In fact, if you use some of the other early release features that we have for automatically installing form updates, you can also hide the whole process of downloading or getting blank forms and simplify the user interface. And that way the team only see the forms that they need. It's also possible to include additional instructions. The extra instructions here are a message that flashes on the screen when the when the default device configuration has finished installing. So It could be whatever message that you have for your team at this point. So once you've set up the options that you like for your project, click on the Save button. So just going back a little bit, if you recall, there was that button on the previous step that said Receive Settings from Collect. Your path to send those settings from Collect looks like this. You would open SurveyCTO Collect on a device, find the three-dot icon in the upper right of the app, and open the admin settings. And again, you would tap on that same button to open the menu in the top right. And you would tap on this button that says Send Settings to the server. As soon as you've done that, SurveyCTO on the server console will confirm that those settings are received. And we can see that on the next slide. Because we're back on the console. You can see here, settings received from, this is the username from this device on such and such a date. If you want, you could delete this. You could also receive new settings to replace it. Here, the only setting which I have configured is I've decided to include a form. However, I could include as many forms as I like. I could enable this one, that one. I could search for others, whatever you like, exactly. Okay, so lastly in this process, how can you set up SurveyCTO Collect with a quick setup link? There are a few options. If you are in Office or you choose to send this QR code for scanning to someone, it can be displayed and scanned, which will start the quick setup process. However, the QR code contains the URL that you see. And the URL can just as easily be sent. You can distribute it by email, via WhatsApp, however you like. All the user needs to do is scan the QR code or open the link, and they will need a username and a password for the app to run the quick setup process. So if you look at the end of the URL, it actually has the server name to use. I've actually made this blue in the screenshot. So you won't want to edit that, but you can customize the link further with the Customize button that you can see below the download option for the QR code. This setting involves an option to add a username into the link as well, if your team happen to be using the same user account, which is sometimes what you want to do. Okay, so at this point, the user has either tapped on the link or scanned the QR code. And we'll take a look at what happens on SurveyCTO Collect. So the person who scanned the link or tapped on the link will be directed to the web page you see on the left of this slide. They can follow the instructions to install SurveyCTO Collect. Remember that this page for now will direct the user to install the early release version of SurveyCTO Collect, which is required. Then, once they've installed it, they can launch the quick setup process. You can see this page in the middle of this slide. All they do is enter the server name. Well, actually, no, sorry, the server name will be populated by the link. The username might be populated depending on whether you decided to customize the link and include it, but they might need to enter that, and the password is required. And all they do is tap on the Run Quick Setup button, which initializes SurveyCTO Collect. With that initialized, settings will be applied. So here we can see what happened on the right. The default device settings were applied. one form was downloaded. And here, my custom instruction message appears at the bottom of the link. And that's really it. Those are the ingredients. So I'll just go over that in bullet point form. To summarize, the steps were to create a default device configuration for a user role for a new project, or it could just be the default device configuration that your organization uses. You could choose whether to add device settings and default forms into that configuration. You send out the link to new team members. Enumerators install SurveyCTO Collect from the setup, and they run the quick setup on their devices from the app, and then they're ready to go. Well, of course, there are some other things that you'll want to do with your team, but at least from a software perspective, they can be up and running. Okay, so something else that you'll definitely want to take care of is training. Obviously, people need more help than only setting up their devices. They need to understand the project. So just like configuring equipment, training that happens remotely is also important to help keep you and your team safe, operating in a decentralized way. This does have its challenges, but fortunately, learning at physical distance isn't a new thing. I would bet that a high number amongst the audience today has at some point registered and participated in an online course for some topic that was interesting to you. Many of the principles of delivering remote learning, like in an online course, are similar to what you might need to achieve. However you approach remote training for your teams, we suggest that you start with learning objectives. What do you want trainees to know and understand by the time that they've completed your training schedule? Not only that, how can you measure those learning outcomes in a way that would make you confident that a trainee was ready to undertake the task ahead? So for objectives, I'll suggest that you want the trainees to understand how their data collection software works. That's one part. And they should also understand how the primary data collection part of your study works, including the concepts that inform the research. How you communicate these depends on the resources and barriers that you face. So I mentioned before that low connectivity settings for trainees will require more reliance on reading text and less focus on multimedia enabled learning. It's unfortunate, but it's a restriction. However, while slow connections might be an impediment to live training of videos and screen sharing, video streaming services like YouTube are actually optimized for most connection speeds and screen sizes. So if you are able to pre-prepare video content, it should actually work well for streaming for most content. Only the very worst internet connections won't allow this. But it's important to understand what you're working with while you are planning your resources. The last point I want to make about remote training is that you should design knowledge assessment into the training and material right from the start. Think about tests, quizzes, and ways that the user can demonstrate practical knowledge. You want to use all of this as evidence to decide that the people who've done the training know enough to be entrusted to do the work that you ask them to do. You'll have no other way of knowing, especially if you are training people remotely. So please think about assessment. To learn more about this, I suggest that you take a look at our remote training guide. We've built out a remote training guide aimed at computer-assisted telephone interviewing projects. And it's one of the resources that I've linked you to already. Okay, so we're getting towards the end of our webinar. I want to speak briefly just about remote accompaniment, which is another piece of decentralized deployment. So what is remote accompaniment? As you're probably familiar, a big part of SurveyCTO's focus on adapting to more safe ways of data collection involves phone interviews, alongside face-to-face interviews, which are not so safe. Computer-assisted telephone interviews are still an interviewer-mediated data collection option. And that means there's still people involved in the collection of the data, and so it's important to monitor the performance of those people on the project to see how well your interviewers are doing. One option is call recording, and audio auditing happens to help to some degree, although due to some Android security limitations, recording isn't always possible on Android. However, you can use third-party services like Twilio and Exetel for call recording. So those are some additional options to think about. However, whether you're recording calls and listening to interviews after the fact or not, remote accompaniment can be a complement or substitute to your processes. So just like with face-to-face interviews, where a supervisor might be present during an interview, sitting there physically to listen into an interview, the same is possible over the phone. This is quite straightforward to do as well, thanks to widely supported call conferencing technology. So what happens is that the enumerator would first call the supervisor and have them on the line. Then they would patch in the respondent. And once the respondent answers, the enumerator can merge the two calls. The supervisor sits in on the call, listens, keeps themselves on mute, and then they have the option of having a post-interview debrief where the supervisor gives the interviewer some pointers and some advice about their conduct and how to improve for follow-up interviews. So remote accompaniment can be a great aid to both training, data quality, while also keeping everybody involved safe, because everything is happening at a distance. We also have a guide on executing remote accompaniment. So do take a look at the resources that we'll email you later and the ones that I've sent out in the chat. So we're at the end of our presentation, but there's just one more thing I'd like to tell you about just before we move to Q&A. I want to encourage you to register for our next webinar on July 29th. This webinar will be a guest webinar with presenters from Young Love, an education NGO based in Botswana. Just ahead of Botswana's national lockdown, they achieved an incredible feat, managing to collect phone numbers from 10,000 children for their remote education program, which they now run. They've been delivering lessons via SMS to students and following up via phone interviews to check up on progress. All of this happens remotely, having also relied upon WhatsApp to deliver remote training to enumerators who work on the project. Now, their program has been running for a while, and it's still a pilot that they're trying to prove the concept for, and they hope to scale up their project and program over time. The Young Love use case is a great example to anyone looking to learn how to deliver services remotely. while monitoring the quality of those services. So please do look out for the email that we'll send. There'll be a link to a registration page allowing you to register and join us on July 29th. Otherwise, thanks very much for your attendance today. We'll move to Q&A now at this point. But just before I do start taking questions, I'd like to remind you to please provide feedback. The topmost link in the webinar is the one to use, that web form link. I'm going to share that link one more time with you. So you can just tap on that link and fill out the browser. All right, so time for Q&A. So we do have a few questions in the chat already. I do hope Prince came right with his issues with the technical side. We don't have a lot of questions, so I'll deal with even some of the more unrelated questions. Looking further up, George asked, what does CTO stand for in the abbreviation in SurveyCTO? So George, CTO stands for Chief Technology Officer, because that's who you are when you are using SurveyCTO. You're in charge of the technology on your survey. So I hope that helps. Okay, so moving on with our questions. Zachary asked whether there's a version of the software for Apple devices. Yes, there is. Please search on the Apple App Store for SurveyCTO. There is an iPhone and iPad compatible application. Our iOS app is a little bit behind our Android application because we are an Android first platform, having started with Android, but the Apple app works great. I use it all the time. We have another question about learning systems. So Cicely, I think you're asking about learning management systems. SurveyCTO itself, to be clear, is not an LMS platform. SurveyCTO is a digital data collection platform aimed at helping you collect high quality data in a super secure way with offline data collection support. So it doesn't have direct support for webinars, but you certainly could design quizzes and so forth. So Sylvestre is asking about the key limitations of remotely surveying. Well, I mean, you can certainly go into more detail there, Sylvestre, about what you have in mind. But I mean, in terms of limitations, it's difficult to comment. I mean, with remote surveys, I mean, you have two primary options with SurveyCTO. You can send web form links. Web forms are not the equivalent of a form that you fill out on a tablet. There are some limitations, but it really depends on your use case. So unfortunately, it's a bit of a broad question, but at least you can get enumerators to fill out forms themselves. But computer-assisted telephone interviewing works well. It can be harder to reach respondents sometimes, but that's kind of the nature of phone surveying. So Prince is also asking, how do we implement CATI? Prince, I'm going to advise you to take a look at our support center. We have a full CATI guide. Please visit this page. So yeah, for anybody who's interested in that, look in the guide section of support.surveycto.com. Look at guides. There is a full CATI guide there. I have another question about call recording. Unfortunately, Ezike, in the time that we have remaining, I'm not able to demonstrate something like call recording. I suggest that you play around a bit though. You have two options. You can use audio audit fields inside your form designs to record calls on some devices, but not all devices. On other devices, you might try the Twilio field plugin. So I'll link to that. So the Twilio field plugin is very new, but it is possible to create a trial and follow instructions to test that out. Sophie is asking whether the feedback survey is anonymous. Yes, the feedback is anonymous if you want it to be. The way that you can see that is that the end of the URL has today's date. So that just tells me that the feedback that we got was from today. Otherwise, we have no idea who sends feedback unless you let us know inside the feedback, but you don't have to do that. So Ezike is asking more questions about call recording. Ezike, it seems that you're right at the beginning. I do suggest that you take a look at our audio auditing features and take a look at Twilio. There's a lot to learn there. Again, more to Ezike, yes, Twilio does support any version of Android. It's completely independent of the version of Android. So please give that a go for reliable recording. Okay, so Christine is asking quite a good question. I'll read it out. That I mentioned that you can set the device once and then everything gets then everything gets on the phone. But what if you wanted to modify settings? Because when you try it out, you notice that some questions are not quite right. So Christine, there are really two parts to that. With the default device configuration, you definitely want to do a lot of testing to make sure that the settings for SurveyCTO Collect are right. If you are convinced that the settings are right, you can even lock down the settings so that the user cannot change them. Inside admin settings, there's an option to password lock. However, if you don't get that right, unfortunately, it will be difficult for the user to solve the problem if they're locked out of settings. So I think it would take a lot of care to make sure that the device settings are set up correctly. But if you are sending out device settings using quick setup, it is possible to run quick setup again and update with newer settings. But I think your question is also about the form design as well. It's always possible to design a form and change the properties of the form. and for users of SurveyCTO Collect who are filling out the form to download newer versions of the form. So that's always possible. If you make a mistake in the form, the user could update that. And the early release version of SurveyCTO Collect can automatically install updates. So that can also help correct issues with the form, so long as you keep on fixing any issues that exist. So I hope that helps. Okay, Nandini asks a great question. Nandini's question is, if there are two devices, one for calls and one for data collection, is there a way to link both devices so that SurveyCTO automatically fills in the phone number? So that is a really great question. At the moment, I don't think there is a perfect solution, because the way that, okay, so one of the ways that this might work is that the form might run on one device and it might display the phone number, which would be manually dialed on the other device. So the link would be the phone number, but the information would need to pass manually between the devices. So that's maybe a bit of a pain, but dialing a phone number is not so hard, and people would be able to do that with, I think, reasonable reliability. So I think that's something to think about. But Nandini, and something else to consider is that if both devices are Android devices, but one just can't make calls, let's say you have an Android phone and an Android tablet, and you're filling the data out on the tablet. Both devices could run SurveyCTO Collect. You could find the right case to call on both devices, and the forms would just be designed accordingly. So the phone that's actually used for the calls could help the enumerator find the phone numbers, and the same case would be located on the other device. However, a small tidbit is that we are working on a field plugin that could display a QR code. So the QR code could be scanned by the one device to transmit the phone number. So that's something to look out for, but it's not something that's ready just yet. So Cicely asks a question about bandwidth requirements. So, I mean, just in general, SurveyCTO as a platform is designed in mind for low bandwidth environments. The Android app itself, for example, is very small, only a matter of megabytes. I think the install size sits around 5-6 megabytes. So that's really not a lot. Forms to install are generally a matter of kilobytes in size, but it does depend on how multimedia enabled forms. Yeah, there really aren't high requirements, but in terms of your remote deployment, it really depends on how multimedia enabled your training resources are. That's a consideration. So do keep that in mind. If enumerators need to stream videos for training, that's something that is going to need to be taken care of. So Abdullah, I think, has an interesting point here. Who your enumerators are. So I assume Abdullah's research context is agriculture, because he's asking about the issue in the context of COVID-19, that it's difficult to introduce like traditional enumerators to farmers. So why not recruit actual enumerators from people who live on farms, which is a great idea. I think that's a fantastic idea, and it's something that we have discussed or speculated on as a team, that for surveys you might look to try and hire people to work on your projects who already live in the places that you want to survey. The risk is lower. There might be some level of local movement that is acceptable, where it might be problematic to send somebody from the city out to the country. So that's a fantastic question. And by the way, I would love to hear any other points about recruitment. So if anybody has any points that they would like to share about recruitment, please do share those. It would be great to hear about that. Otherwise, I see a question about doing surveys in French. Just briefly, yes, SurveyCTO is a multilingual platform. It is possible to design forms in French or any other language. The mobile app especially is localized into different languages, including French. Maria asks whether it will be possible to view the slides later. Yes, Maria, you'll receive an email sometime tomorrow with a link to the slides, a recording of our presentation, as well as all the links that I've shared. So don't worry. You will be able to review all of the content. So we are just a couple minutes away from the end of our Q&A session. If anybody has any other questions, please shoot. But I would really like to hear any anecdotes about remote recruitment. For projects that are starting, how are you guys managing to find people to work on projects? Are you recruiting locals? Are you partnering with other organizations to try and help you find people who can help work on projects? The recruitment part of this is really important, because without people to work on the project, there often is no project. Okay, so Ezekiel shares that in his case, they tend to use old data collectors from past projects, and that's certainly a great option. If you have that available to you, tried and trusted team members are people that would be great to work with. Unfortunately, it won't always be possible, but it really is a great option. Gail asks, is there a cost related to using SurveyCTO? Yes, Gail, that is true. SurveyCTO is a subscription software service. You can learn more on our website about pricing. There is also a free version of SurveyCTO. If your needs for data collection fall inside the limits of our free offering, that's great. You're welcome to use it free as well. But please take a look at the website to learn about costs. So Ezekiel is explaining that during training they usually have issues with internet from data collectors. What sort of problems, Ezekiel, and how are you solving those? Actually, maybe I can unmute you if you're willing to speak. I know we're on time, but it would be great to for anybody who's interested. So if you are willing to share a bit, you're welcome to share. Hi, Ezekiel.
Can you hear me?
Yes, very well, thanks.
Yeah, so I just concluded a training a few days ago.
Great.
So usually during the training, because I'm in Nigeria currently.
Yes.
So during the training, because we have our data collectors in different states in Nigeria, so some of them were actually having issues with their internet, you know.
Okay.
So what we did after the first day of training was to, of course, advise them to get multiple internet sources, you know, using different networks. And of course, some of them had to leave, you know, like the local villages where they are to like the city where, you know, they can get better coverage, you know. But of course, we still had that issue during the 5 days of training that we had. You know, but it was better at some point.
Okay.
Yeah. Those were like the major challenges we had during the training. But it was good. It was a good one.
It sounds like it must have been a good learning experience for you and your team as well.
Yeah, of course. It was a good learning experience. A good learning experience, actually.
Did you optimize the training content at all to make sure that it was small enough for low speed connections?
Did we optimize what?
Did you try and change the training content in a way that made it easier for people on slow connections to connect?
Yeah, so what we did was, because we started with using Zoom. So at some point we had to split the data collectors into subgroups. So we decided to use like WhatsApp subgroups.
Okay.
So thank God WhatsApp now has more than 4. You can connect to more than four users at the same time. So we splitted the groups into groups of 5, 6. You know, and we had a smaller group where we had trainers going to those smaller group and because of course I discovered that WhatsApp uses minimal connection, so it was easy to deliver some of this training on WhatsApp.
Okay, brilliant.
Yeah,
that's so exciting to hear. Well, thanks for sharing that. Is there anything more for now that you'd like to share with the group?
Yeah, I really want to use SurveyCTO because I have upcoming surveys which will be happening sometime next month. So I really want to use SurveyCTO to implement those surveys, because currently we are not using SurveyCTO, but because I've seen a lot of improvements from SurveyCTO. I've been reading, you know, before I saw this webinar. So I've been reading a lot on SurveyCTO, and I really want to use SurveyCTO in my next survey that's coming up next month.
Okay, brilliant. So well,
I'm asking some of these recording questions and yeah.
Well, I mean, we're here to help. I mean, you can reach out to the support team if you haven't started a trial already. Please do that and connect with the team. We're only too happy to help you get started. But great speaking with you and the rest of everybody on the webinar. Thanks so much for joining us. We are a few minutes past time. Once again, thanks for your attendance. You will receive an email with all the content, including the slides, and in a day's time. Just very lastly, Prince asked a question about if there are any added costs about using CATI. No added costs from our side, Prince, but of course you may incur phone costs, etc., depending on how you're connecting your respondents and enumerators. Naturally, there would be costs associated with the phone calls, but none of that's from our side. Right, thanks everybody. Have a good day further, wherever you are, whether that's morning or or evening. Bye-bye. Cheers.